Morning, everybody. It's Thursday morning, so we're the 30th of 2021, one day from New Year's Eve. I do have a gig tomorrow, which is good. Make a little money, help pay some of January's bills coming up. But I want to talk to you about some of my hopes and wishes for 2022. Both personal, channel, broader spectrum, hopes and wishes for 2022. And the first thing on my list, and I would guess this would be the first on most people's lists, is the retreat of COVID. It's been a long 2 years. The toll has been immense on people's health and welfare, financially, mental health. It's just like it's been an exhausting period of uncertainty and lacking clarity. It'd be one thing if we knew this was the outcome of what was happening and there was an agreement, a consensus. But the fact that things are so polarized, and so, especially here in America, maybe in other places of the world it's not quite the same way, but here in America there's two completely different streams of thought. It's one more way we've become divided and polarized and unwilling to see the other ways, the other side's way of thinking, and it crosses over into the political spectrum, and there's no way I could ever agree with those people because of this. Same with abortion and so many other issues. It's just a divisive thing, but it makes the end game and the bigger picture tougher to see clearly. And unlike with like weapons of mass destruction, where we saw through pretty quickly the deception there, whatever deception is going on here, and there is some, no question, there's too much divide for there not to be some deception happening. But it's been exhausting. It's just been very emotionally tolling. My wife has worked in homeless shelters. She's back working as a social worker right now. She's also doing some 911 dispatching right now, which she just started that job. And there's just a lot of crisis out there. And on top of the crisis and the health issues, there's a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of exhaustion. And it's just needs to resolve itself. It just needs to move forward. That's my hope and prayer for 2022, is that we can put this mess in our rearview mirror and start living life like we used to prior to this pandemic. And I'm not saying everything's going to go back to being how it was or be the same, but I would sort of like to see it subside and become a much smaller issue than it currently has been. And that'd be my number one prayer, hope, dream. It's just been a lot, and of course it impacts DJ work quite a lot. It impacts how much restaurants are gonna have capacity wise, and then that's gonna impact how much they want to pay and hire me. If they got to consider their limited seating, they're not gonna want to pay a DJ. So it's affected my livelihood very directly. There was compensation back in 2019, 2020. Nothing like that exists right now. So it's just been a tough road, and I'm sure everybody else feels the same way, no matter what field of work they're in. It's been a lot. I also hope that the international divide that exists between us, between like China and the West, that we find some clarity on that. Let's not lead ourselves back into another Cold War, another arms race. Even though it's good for economies and business, it's not good for the health and welfare of the people. And it certainly diverts the tax base away from building strong middle classes and building healthcare and school systems. And it's just time that we aren't a victim. Our tax dollars should be used for us, for our benefit. And that goes for whatever country you're in, And these are hopes. Excuse me. And a hope is just that. It's just a hope, I'm not naive. There's not going to be world peace by the end of this coming year. but I'd like to see some progress. Something's shaken up, and maybe there can be some goodwill if the pandemic wraps itself up. Maybe we can have a little bit of post-pandemic joy, peace, harmony. The world certainly is in need of that type of a thing. On channel-wise now, what I would like to see for 2022, I would like to see my subscriber base hit 6,000 subscribers this coming year. And I don't know the exact number where it was at the beginning of 2021, but we've done a pretty good job increasing those subscribers this year. We've probably added 1,500 subscribers. I'm getting somewhere in that. I can look, but I'm not sure exactly. And I'd like to see the Patreon grow and double as well in 2022. It's a nice little chunk right now, but it's not enough to sustain myself when work is thin. And I'd like to see that number grow. And so those are my two personal goals for the channel: is just keep growing the subscriber base and give me some impact and some thoughts, insight on some subjects you guys would like to see me tackle in 2022. And I don't think people should be asking me to cover things I don't know well, because there's no point in me covering a subject I don't know well. So if you ask me to cover current jazz artists, I just don't have the capacity, the finances, and even the will to dive too deeply into that. So we're going to keep it kind of, that vintage jazz era, but there's so much to talk about that we haven't talked about still. So just some thoughts, some insight. I know people have been asking for throat grabbers. I want to bring throat grabbers back in 2022 for sure. As I've explained before, it just requires me to have more intensive listening time. There's times where I put music on and I'm doing stuff, and you don't really get the same impact from it. You might hear something, but you don't have the time to write it down, and it's not the same as when you're just sitting there kind of really engulfed in it, and then those throat grabbers can really knock you out of your seat. So I'd like to see a return to having more time to do that. Tone Poet, I would like to see some things from Tone Poet in 2022. And Hank Mobley Curtain Call was supposed to come out in November or December of this year, and I'm guessing it's a pressing plant thing. I'm not sure, but it got postponed to like February or March of next year. So I'm looking forward to Curtain Call. There's a few Jackie McLean records, but I'm not as big a Jackie McLean fan as I once was. His sound is a little bit edgy and intense. I still love Jackie, don't get me wrong, but he's not as much of a priority for me as Hank. I love Hank, and I love his tone and his approach to the music. And there's a few other titles I'd like to see added to the Tone Poet playlist, release list. And I don't know how realistic any of these are. I don't have any insight into that. These are just titles I know that Blue Note has in the vaults that need a nice reissue in the modern era. Two of them are at Quebec, with A Song of My Heart and Congo Lament. I think I have Congo Lament with a different title, different cover, but it needs a nice Tone Poet release. I'm a big Ike Quebec fan. He was an A&R guy for Blue Note. In the late 40s, early 50s, he's doing some 45s that are kind of R&B tinged jazz for Alfred Lion and Blue Note. And then he kind of goes into disuse. He becomes more of an A&R guy for the label, to the talent scout. And then he convinces Alfred to let him do some albums of his own in 59, 60, 61. And they're some of my favorite Blue Note albums. They're fantastic. Big fan of like Quebec sound. He's rich, he's bold, he's got that full-hearted tone, plays from his soul, a lot of just gut in what he's doing. And both with The Song of My Heart and Congo Lament could have wonderful Tone Poet releases. I'm not sure he's as in demand as some of the other Tone Poet guys like Bobby Hutcherson are, but those sessions to me would be wonderful additions. I would love to see Africane, the early Art Blakey Messenger session from, I think it's like 1960. I'd like to see Tone Poet release that. I think that's a worthy addition to the Tone Poet Art Blakey catalog. Harold Land, Take Aim, was a Blue Note session that Harold Land does in 1960. I would love to see that be reissued by Tone Poet. Apparently Bob Brookmeyer and Bill Evans do a session for Blue Note in 1959. And I would love to see that. Brookmeyer and Bill Evans, those guys are fantastic players, composers, and arrangers. And and I bet you it's got a wonderful modern sound to it, and it would be a fairly big departure from the rest of the Blue Note canon, without question. But anytime you have Evans and Brookmeyer together, I think it's called As Time Goes By from '59. And I'll be honest with you, when I was doing my research on this, I don't remember this one being there, but it's there, and I think it's the LA series. One of the later Blue Note series does issue it, but it's needing definitely a wonderful Tone Poet release. I think that'd be a fantastic addition to the Tone Poet catalog. And there's a few of the labels I'd like to see featured more in 2022. These are labels that are near and dear to my heart, that really get passed over. They need a modern reissue series because the titles are hard to find. First and foremost is Bethlehem, but don't do it half-ass. Don't do it without the red crimson labels with the leaf and the you have to have the real deal. Do it right. I know Fresh Sound did a lot of Bethlehem there for a while, and they do an okay job. They sound fine. I think they're digital transfers, but I have a few Fresh Sound Bethlehems, and there's nothing wrong with them. But I think Bethlehem deserves a wonderful reissue program that covers the 10-inch era, the BCP series, and then the 6000 series. There's so many great titles in there. A lot of them have never been reissued. A lot of them are very tough to find. I think a lot of the singers need to be repressed as well. A lot of great Bethlehem vocal jazz that just is so obscure, and it makes the originals very expensive. And I recognize that if these get reissued, it actually will diminish the value of some of my Bethlehem stuff, because when there's an expensive original and now there's all of a sudden affordable reissues, you can't sell that original for the same anymore. But I'm not into it for that necessarily. It's not about the profit and return on my investment. I don't look at my jazz that way at all. And I don't care if... I'd rather have a bunch of people have Bethlehem records and know the music, and then protect the cost of my 10 inches. You know, it's not really that big of a concern to me. Secondly, the Dawn label. It's a great little label on the East Coast. I believe it's affiliated with the Seco pop label. And Dawn was an imprint that ran about 24, 25 titles. I've talked about them a few times. Some great records on there from Paul Kinnichet, Randy Weston, Zoot Sims, just the jazz modes, Charlie Rouse and Julius Watkins. There's just some really great, modern, cool bop. A lot of it's white, but it's really great stuff. It kind of fits in with the Bethlehem family. There's some crossover action between the musicians to some degree, just like there was between Prestige and Riverside and Blue Note. Labels like Dawn and Bethlehem and Storyville are exchanging artists kind of the same way, because there was still a fairly big racial gap even in the mid-50s, late 50s. There's not a lot of racial integration happening at the labels, and these people are worried about their investments, you know, and so they got to be careful what they do, because of the climate socially and politically in America. It's something that's always going to factor into what a big label does and what a small label does. And so I'd love to see Dawn, who also has great album covers, have a nicely packaged, repressed series of some of the great Dawn titles. And the Dawn situation would be much easier to do. There's only about 24 titles. Some of them are compilations. So you could probably really get by with doing even 18 of their titles and really have people have access to one of the great little labels that really goes under the radar right now. The third label I'd like to see really have some reissues given to us would be the Prestige side label New Jazz. And OJC did do some of the New Jazz stuff, and those are the titles that we're familiar with on the New Jazz label. But there's a lot of New Jazz stuff that hasn't been reissued at all, or not anytime recently, or with any kind of degree of care and quality. I think Prestige has fairly good representation in the marketplace today, but New Jazz, there's just a lot of stuff that's really expensive and really tough to come by. The Japanese have done most of it, if not all of it, but the Japanese pressings here in America have gotten really tough to come by, in part because of the shipping expense. You can find them in Japanese stores, but you're going to pay as much for shipping as you will for the record in some cases. And that's not a very desirable situation. So once again, something COVID's impacted is the cost of shipping internationally. And it's really gotten out of hand how much it costs to ship a record from Japan, or from Japan to England, from Japan to Europe. I've had a lot of people comment to me how they want to find a record, but the shipping from America to the continent of Europe has gotten out of hand. So shipping's really gotten out of hand everywhere internationally. And hopefully we can see that recede back to some normal levels if COVID recedes. But there's no guarantees that some of those prices will ever go back down, because oftentimes that's not the case. But there's so many great new jazz titles that to me need to have a quality repressing. Starting with the Gigi Grice stuff, the Benny Golson stuff. They're so expensive. The originals are so rare, and beat up copies go for hundreds of bucks. The Japanese, like I said, they did most of them, but they're not that easy to come by, and certainly the shipping is really a deterrent. And so I think someone would do pretty well with reissuing the new jazz sequence. Some of those great titles deserve to be out there. VJ is another label. I just played this record the other day, one of Lee Morgan's more obscure titles. Again, Blue Note gets so much love, and deservedly so, that a great title like this by Lee Morgan featuring Art Blakey, Wynton Kelly, Cliff Jordan, and Paul Chambers. You know, there's great Wayne Shorter stuff, there's great Wynton Kelly stuff. There's some great stuff on VJ from 59, 60, 61. Paul Chambers has 2 records as a leader there, Go and First Baseman. Outstanding stuff, and some of them have been reissued. I've seen the Paul Chambers First Baseman in print. I've seen one of the Lee Morgans in print. But they deserve a nice quality repackaging. And there's so many small labels that have slipped under the radar. The Storyville sequence out of Boston, there's 22 titles plus another 24 10-inches that all could deserve a nice quality reissuing. And what's sad, but at some levels it makes sense, most modern collectors don't value something until they see it being in print. For most collectors, it makes them think that it has value. If it's not been repackaged or not been reissued, it can't be any good. And I think I once had that mentality myself. And boy, there's so much great jazz that just has not been reissued, and it slipped through the cracks and fell into obscurity. And the longer it stays in obscurity, the longer no one's going to repackage it. And so there needs to be a demand for this stuff, and that's where we come into play. That's where we need to start voicing our interest in these things and saying, you know, we would love to see some of these titles. And boy, there's so many small record labels that I can think of. There's some great Jubilee titles that need to be reissued. So there's a lot of in between the cracks stuff that needs to be out there to get the new consumer excited about it, so that they see the value in it. And in some cases, it would probably propel the sales of the old titles as well, the old stock that's out there, because, oh, it's in print, this must be good. And I don't know how that's got become, how people measure what's good, because it certainly doesn't tell the whole story in any way, shape, or form. But Bethlehem, New Jazz, and Dawn are the 3 that for sure I would love to see more of that stuff available in the reissue market, and see people excited about the reissue of Zut Sims on Dawn, you know, or Jerome Richardson on New Jazz. Some great stuff needs to be reshared with the people. One more personal thing, I want to lose weight in 2022. It's been tough with, you know, being in the home all the time. We've been down to one car a lot of times for having some car issues. The closest health club is 20 miles away in Rochester. My wife is working long hours. It's hard for me to make dinner and then want to jump into town and go work out. I haven't even had the money really for a membership these last few months. And it's hard for me to play basketball outside on concrete. I'm old, I'm almost 50, my knees can't take the concrete, so I need that wood surface. I don't really do well just kind of, you know, running on a treadmill. I need sports, I need a ball to chase around, to be competitive, to really get my heart up and really participate. And so I'm hoping I can get back into a health club this year in 2022, because, you know, at 50 I can't be this weight. So that's one of my other personal issues. And then the last thing I want to kind of talk about is a few jazz records that I hope to find in 2022. And a few of these are out there now, but I just don't have the money right now because I'm not working. I got enough right now coming in to keep up with my utilities, the bills in this house. And so there's no money for extracurricular stuff, including buying records right now. And so as that changes, I was talking to a restaurant opening up across the street. I might get some work over there. We'll see. But these are some records I hope I can find in 2022 as things change for me and as things can kind of hopefully get back to normal. There's a great Walter Bishop record that I would love to track down. I think it's on the East West label. East West was an imprint affiliated with Atlantic Records, and they don't do a lot of titles. There's only 4, I think, in the East West Jazz imprint. One of them is a great Jackie Parrish record, which I found a couple years ago in the wild, believe it or not. But I'd love to track down those. I think one of them is a George Wallington record, if I remember. But the Walter Bishop record is something I've kind of wanted. It's been on my back burner for some time. Tommy Potter is another one I'd like to track down. Another guy that kind of really gets overlooked and forgotten about, even though he was part of the bebop era. He's got a record out there that I've been trying to track down. And I'm watching them on Discogs, but I haven't found the titles I'm looking for. And again, I can't really spring for nothing right now anyway. Bill Barron has a couple records on Savoy at 12-165 or so, 12-170. Modern Windows and I can't remember the other ones, the Stylings Over maybe. I'd like to find both of those. They're both kind of after the Savoy sequence where I've stopped collecting it, around 12-154 or so. But those are 2 titles I want to add into my Savoy discography because they both seem very noteworthy. And I've heard they're both great records. I don't own either of them. In fact, I don't know if I've ever seen either of them, especially not in the wild. But in Minnesota, you don't see Savoy records of any kind in the wild. You just don't. They're very much an East Coast thing. I don't think I've bought most of my Savoys from anywhere but the East Coast. You know, I buy them through Discogs or eBay, and they're always coming from New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, that whole East Coast New York areas where the Savoy records seem to have stayed. They didn't get very good distribution, especially not the 50s Savoy stuff. So I'd love to track those down. There's a Ken McIntyre record on United Artists called Iron Sheep, I believe it is. And it's part of the last United Artists record I really want to find. They have 2 different sequences, a 4,000 sequence, which is the mono. I think it's 5,000 for stereo. And that sequence has kind of more mainstream stuff. And there's some jazz titles in that are great, but it's more mainstream jazz. And then they have a separate sequence. I think it's the 14,000 sequence, if I remember. And that's more jazz on the edge. And there's some great titles in there. A lot of them you're going to be familiar with, like the Money Jungle Ellington Max Rhodes record. There's a lot of great stuff in that United Artists sequence. And I'd really like to track down that Iron Sheep record by Ken McIntyre, who's a great player and who's kind of overlooked somewhat. But again, he has a new jazz title or 2 that go for big money as well. One of the records I've been looking for through most of 2021 and was never able to find for a decent price is the Teddy Edwards Good Gravy on Contemporary Records. It's about 3595, or it's right at the end of the 3500 sequence, which is the mono of that. The 7000 would be the stereo. I'd be happy with a stereo copy of Good Gravy, but Good Gravy seems to have been omitted from the Contemporary OJC reissue program in the 80s. And OJC did a lot of the Contemporary titles, and a lot of those have not become too collectible or expensive because the OJC versions are out there and they're great sounding, and so it's kept a lot of the OJC stuff, a lot of the Contemporary stuff, very affordable. This one never got that packaging, and it's therefore this really expensive Contemporary record. There's not a lot of other Contemporary records that fetch this kind of money, and you find them in Europe, you find them in Japan. They go for $200, $300, $400, $500 for Good Gravy, and I would like to find one for under $100 at some point. Again, not right now, but when I have some money, I'd like to find that record. And I love Teddy Edwards. He's a great tenor player, and Teddy Edwards was part of that whole Central Avenue scene in Los Angeles in the 40s with Wardell Gray and Dexter Gordon and Hampton Hawes. There's a lot of great players that were playing in the black clubs on Central Avenue in Los Angeles, and of course he was a part of that scene. And I need to track down Good Gravy at some point this year. And there's also one Argo record that I have not been able to track down. I have the entire Argo sequence, minus the Cesar Giovannini record, who's obviously an Italian-American piano player. I think it's going to be fairly easy listening, I guess. But it's just been I can't find it. And there's a lot of rare Argo records. A lot of Argo records have not been reissued. And that'd be another thing I'd like to see in 2022, is some of the great Argo titles from the 50s get that reissuing. The Paul Gonsalves record, that should be reissued. The, what's his name? the trumpet player from St. Louis, Clark Terry. He's got a great record early on in the Argo series that needs to be reissued. There's a lot of great early Argo stuff that's not available right now. Pinky Winters, that record's outstanding. I've listened to it probably 6 times since I've got it. It's such a great record, and it's not available. You can't find it. And I always think it sucks when I talk about a record and people can't find it anywhere. And streaming is not the same, as we all know. So, in summation, in 2022, let's move forward from some of this mess and chaos of the last few years. Let's set aside some of this political strife and try to find a new way forward. Try to see each other as equal, as humans, regardless of race, regardless of religion, regardless of politics. We share a lot more than we have than what's different. And there should be more of a celebration of life. And I hope that as the pandemic resides, we can find some of that joy and some of that happiness and live as the post-war generation lived in the 50s. Like there was an exuberance and a joy. And it's just been a tough couple years for a lot of people. So my heart goes out to all of you. I love you and appreciate you all. I want to thank you all sincerely for helping support me and my family through Patreon, through the merchandise store. Anybody who wants to help out that way is always appreciated, and I'll send you a personal message if you do. And I'm always willing to chat with anybody, anytime. You know, if I'm busy with my wife, I'll get back to you when I have time. You know, that's pretty much the only time I don't respond to someone is when my wife is needing my time. She's working a lot right now, trying to do some catching up on her end, and so when she's home, I gotta be with her at that time. But other than that, it's I'm pretty available and willing to chat with people anytime I get the chance. This is a great Riverside record here I'm going to show you. This is Pal Joey, Kenny Drew Trio, and it's the stereo cover. I think if I remember, the mono covers are different, and this has Philly Joe Jones with and Al Wilbur Ware with them. That's a great little trio record on the Riverside label. I'm just a huge fan of early Riverside stuff. They're one of the great underappreciated labels of that time and era. That's what we've been listening to. So again, that wraps up today's episode. Just a little recap and some hopes for the coming year. It's been a good year for the channel. It's been a good year communicating with you all. I know I've grown some. I know I've made some changes in how I present. I'm trying not to be as critical and as demeaning of things I'm not a fan of. I don't think it does anybody any favors for me to be, ridiculing something that I don't find value in. If you value it, that's great. So I think that's something I've really made an effort in 2021 to not be, versus how I was in 2020. And so 2022, I hope I can grow some more. I'm always trying to learn. I'm always trying to present and be as positive as I can. I don't want to come off as I'm condemning the hi-fi people, like I said last episode. If you like hi-fi, that's great. And if you just want to buy jazz records so you can hear your speakers, I don't really have a problem with it, I guess. It just seems to be too common. But jazz is such an important thing. And it's so undervalued in our culture today. We're all searching for meaning. We're all searching for something that makes us feel something. And here's this music, jazz, that comes from oppression, that comes from a tough time, that comes from a place of oppression and chained. A chained people without a voice. And this music has this liberation in it, this joy, this exuberance of life. Just, you won't hold me down. You can't oppress me. I will resiliently bounce back up. And I think so many of us are looking for purpose. We're looking for meaning. We're looking for something that makes us feel something. And jazz is right here saying, hey, you don't got to look that far. Right here in your own country's history is this music that has all that tangible power in it. And I know it's electrified me and changed my spirituality, my life, understanding how jazz makes me feel. And I know communicating that with any people, a lot of them have really found value in that opinion, how they see and hear jazz now. And I implore people, when you listen to jazz, try to listen to what it makes you feel. Think about the time and place that it was in and what these people must be saying. And even simply listen to what Chet Baker says as a white cat on the West Coast, with a drug problem, what's he got to be saying to you? Think about it. And all those white cats can play their asses off, but they're going to be talking from their experience. And then listen to some intense black cats from the East Coast, a Lee Morgan, a Wayne Shorter. These guys are hungry and desperate. Donald Byrd. And think about their experience in their environment and how what they must be saying can't be the same. And it's not. When you think about it and try to feel it and dig into it from that vantage point, you'll hear and feel what I'm talking about. It's not mythology. It's art. And art can only comment on your experience. You can't fake it. You just can't fake it. It only comes from the soul. And anything that is fake doesn't stand the test of time. And that's true for hip hop. It's true for, writing and anything else. So jazz has such an important place and value in my life. And I'm glad you guys let me share it with y'all. And it has such an important value. Share it with your friends, share it with your children, share it with your relatives. And many will reject it and not have the time for it. But so many people have been put off jazz by the wrong music, by the wrong feelers. So often it's presented as something that's so hectic and frenetic and unmelodic, and you have to be so complex and introspective to listen to it. And most people don't want to have that kind of complexity. They have enough complexity in their life as it is. So when you present jazz to your friends and your relatives, give them something that's easy to put their teeth into, that they're going to want to digest. Put on some Ike Quebec Heavy Soul. Put on some Johnny Harmon. I just dropped by to say hello. Put on some Bill Evans, Peace. Put on the stuff that's going to make inroads into them and make them want to have this music part of their life. And if they want to get into the abstract, far out stuff that's intense and has all these, great. But let's try to just push the love of jazz more than anything else, because it does have a power, and it does have a purpose, and it does have a meaning. And in these tough times, I'll tell you what, nothing has given me more perspective than jazz. Because in my days when my stress levels are high, and my tension, and I think about what's going on in the world and my wife being out, it's jazz that gives me that perspective that says people have been through something much tougher for much longer, for centuries. And they overcame it, and they made great art in spite of it. And it does elevate me. It does lift me up. It edifies my spirit. It brings me joy. That's the power of it. And you can only get that power when you have that insight. And I hope that's what this channel brings to people, is insight into jazz beyond just the notes and the covers and the pressings. It's the power of the art. What is the art saying? So happy New Year to everybody. 2022, we're ready for you. Let's hope you bring us a little bit more good news, a little bit less of this stress and this chaos. And even if you do bring us a lot of chaos, we will survive. So prayers, love, blessings